Today on the MrMaple Show podcast, Matt and Tim count down the top 20 underrated Japanese maples.
All right, y'all, we're back with another MrMaple podcast. Today we're going to be talking about some underrated plants. There's a lot of Japanese maples that don't get enough attention. They might be ones we don't talk about enough. They might be ones you guys see but don't snatch up immediately, and you should because they're underrated. They have something about them that makes them not appreciated as much as we think they should be.
I know. We just did our, top 20 trees that Japanese maples we hate. We did our fastest growing. I think underrated fits right in there with these. It's one of those topics that I think needs to be focused on more because there's so many cool trees out there. People need to be growing. There's so many awesome trees out there. I'd say one of the most underrated trees, it's an honorable mention for Japanese maples. One of the most underrated among collectors is the Bloodgood Japanese maple.
Had to be honorable mention on here. Like we talked about it recently in a fast growing podcast, so I didn't want to harp on Bloodgood too much, but man, so underrated. Doesn't get enough love for what it is. I mean, there's too many forms of Bloodgood out there. The correct right form, completely underrated. Heat tolerant, great, fast growing,
great fall
beautiful,
color.
Great fall color. Provides what a lot of people are looking for in the landscape. I think because it's so common, a lot of collectors hate on it. They're like, I'd never have a Bloodgood in my collection. I don't even have that one. But I mean, it's a great plant. I mean, Bloodgood it's a piece of Japanese maple history too. Interestingly enough, the last name of the nursery and the gentleman who found this was Bloodgood, and that's Bloodgood Nurseries. It's kind of how this one comes about. A lot of people associate the name, with the color Bloodgood, but it actually comes from the person's last name. Don't want to talk about it all day, but we had to bring Bloodgood up, at least an honorable mention on here for underrated. Sometimes I feel a little underrated. I feel like, sometimes y'all are giving Tim too much love in the chat. I feel a little underrated. So let's get into our top 20 underrated Japanese maples.
Guys, coming to number 20, we got Acer palmatum Burgundy Lace. This is a classic red upright Japanese maple with a Matsumori leaf. Selection by Vermeulen's and Sons Nursery. Beautiful, excellent tree. You don't see in the trade enough.
Yeah, whenever possible, we go see the original something. We actually got to go up there with Nancy Vermeulen and see the very first Burgundy Lace. Amazing plant. Fast growing, heat tolerant. It's been around a while, so it kind of had its heyday probably in the 80s and 90s. Underrated now. Still a fast growing, beautiful tree. For a lot of people, it looks like an upright red lace leaf, and in many ways because of the heavy Matsumori style leaf. Doesn't get enough love.
Yeah, I think that it holds its color better than some of the varieties like Sherwood Flame. It's got this nice semi-pendulous habit. And seeing that original tree at Vermeulen's and Sons Nursery, there in New Jersey, I mean, it's massive. It's one of the biggest Japanese maples I've ever seen. It's extremely old. It's beautiful. Oddly enough, Burgundy Lace throws red filigree lace-like seedlings, and that's where Red Feathers came from, was a seedling off of Burgundy Lace. It is one of those trees that's easy to grow. It's durable, gives good red fall color, and good red spring and summer color as well.
I was never a Mad TV guy. I was always an SNL guy. I didn't like Mad TV back in the day. But one of the funnier sketches they always had was that Lowered Expectations dating show. Like Lowered Expectations. This is the opposite of that. These are not trees that you should lower your expectations for. These are great trees that might not get the look they deserve. So definitely check these out. Guys, coming in here at number 19, we've got Acer palmatum Tsukushigata.
Yes, Tsukushigata is one of those classic Japanese maples. One of the older selections from the 1800s. It's got that dark, almost black red color. You can get some bronze coloring a little bit during the summer with some emerald hues. The green stemming contrasts well with it, and you get some orange fall colors that are to die for.
Big leaves, yellowish green veining in it too. So you kind of get this yellowish green veining on top of that darker color. You mentioned the stems, but even the leaf itself feels etched out a bit. Really contrasts so nicely with that very dark foliage. Kind of gets to a more brick mauve color at times too. But early spring, one of the darkest, I mean, almost black red Japanese maples. Really underrated. I mean, this one, gosh, I could see this one being a lot more popular if more people were growing it.
And I think that's the main problem with this. People don't have this as an option. We often see this one fall into some of the top 5s we do on the Mr. Maple show on YouTube. But there's not a lot of people who have the selection. And the more people who grow this, they fall in love with it because it's unique colors, it's color contrast with itself, it's color contrast with itself in the fall. It's one of those Japanese maples that's heavily underrated and needs to be produced more.
See, so it's not ugly. You just got to give it a chance. Lowered expectations. No lower expectations here. These are winners, guys. These are ones. Their mama don't think they're the only one that thinks they're good looking. Everybody does. These are ones that just haven't got out there enough yet. All right, coming in next, we've got Acer japonicum Aka Omote. Now, I can see this. We've talked about it a little bit before. I'd love to do some genetic testing on it. Certainly the stemming and stuff, and a lot of the branch structure and the leaf structure make me think either hybrid with Pseudosebuldianum or Seboldianum. Like there's some definitely something going on there. The Sue Eager podcast where she talked about how Japonicums hybridize with Seboldianums and Pseudosebuldianums really made me start thinking about Aka Omote differently. I'd love to do some more cold tolerant testing on this one. A little bit different than Japonicums. One, it's way faster growing than a lot of the other Acer Japonicums.
And the colors that this gives, some of those ruby red colors, it's also known as the Jim's Ruby Red or Ruby Red. Sometimes it's listed as Acer Chirisolemum because it does have that full moon style leaf. It is one of those Acer Chirisolemums that I love, and I don't think enough people give it credit. I mean, this is a colorful Acer Japonicum that's just going to be amazing.
Aka Omote is looking at you from the greenhouse saying, why don't you love me? Why don't you love me more? Where's the love, y'all, for Aka Omote? Things like Blush and Beauty sell out really quickly. Everybody's on the hype train for Blush and Beauty. Aka Omote, the original blushing Japonicum style, intense kind of a spring blushing of red over top of that green. You get kind of an evergreen to almost like a darker green color than most for that older growth. So it really contrasts well with that new growth that's kind of pink red going on. So it's a really interesting plant overall.
At a young age too, it has that narrower structure. I see what you're talking about, how it could be, possibly a hybrid with Pseudosebuldianum, maybe even something like Taka Cements, because you have that same kind of narrow structure that you don't get on many of the other Acer Japonicums.
Mm-hmm. Aka Omote is looking at you saying, please love me. Why don't you love me?
Coming at number 17, we've got Acer palmatum Peve Starfish.
Now, it is a pet peeve of mine when people call it Peve Starfish, but I do love this plant, and it is criminally underrated. You should be arrested if you don't have this in your collection. If you consider yourself a collector, it is top notch. But I don't think it gets the love it did, at least out the gate. This one, when it first came out the gate, I mean, my goodness, the 3 gallons were selling high end, eBay. People were freaking out over this one. I don't think it's continued at the hype level as it's gotten more common. But I love this plant. I think more people should have Peve Starfish in their garden. Absolutely phenomenal plant. It doesn't get enough love for what it is. Smaller, convex leaves, great fall color. It was high up on the list for our favorite fall color, Japanese maples. I get a great pink red out of this one. Doesn't get enough love for the fall color alone, much less the smaller stature.
I agree 100%. When this tree first came out the gate, I was seeing 1 gallons going for $75. And people weren't batting an eye. Not at our nursery. It was when we were trying to get a hold of this tree. And it is a Japanese maple that is outrageously awesome. But right now, it's heavily underrated. I mean, for me, it is an upright, a small to mid-sized upright, 6 to 8 foot in 10 years. Fits in the garden in so many places and has a unique texture that cups down like a starfish.
They call it a starfish because it looks like a starfish in the garden. Go check out our full breakdown where we did, and we show you some massive specimens of this at Buckholtz Nursery. I know even at Buckholtz, he used to price this one up a good bit, and maybe that higher price range kind of turns people off for a while. Now it's kind of, as it's gotten out there, the price has come down to a more common price range on this one. It was kind of priced up a lot of places for a long time, and maybe that's why it's so criminally underrated. Peve Starfish, though, is super dope. Gets kids into gardening. Kids are going to remember it. It's definitely distinctly different than Trompenberg. Maybe that's probably some of the confusion with that one. People think at Trompenberg they already have a convex style tree. Well, that's like a 25-foot tree, where Peve Starfish is going to be something in that 6 to 8 foot range. For me, better fall color, more defined curling, more defined starfish like shape on the leaf. Just all around beautiful tree, especially when it's leafing out in the early spring and you get that cup down look to it. It just adds so much texture to the garden. So underrated.
When you see this in fall color, it is outrageous. It is amazing to see just the intense reds coming into that cupped starfish leaf. It's one of my favorite trees out there. And I think more people need to appreciate how awesome Peve Starfish is. And that's why I have it coming in at number 17.
Don't be afraid to ask Peve Starfish on a second date, y'all. It's a good plant. All right, coming in here at number 16, we got Pung Kil, Acer palmatum, Pung Kil. Now, maybe this one's criminally underrated because it has kill in the name. It sounds like you might kill it. It's kill plant. This one's Pung Kil.
Don't kill a Pung Kil.
Yeah, don't kill it, guys. Underrated, though. I mean, this one's great.
Pung Kil, strong grower, deep dark black color on a linear lobum, fairly narrow at a young age, gives that bamboo-esque feel out there in the garden. Selection from South Korea, from Chilipo Arboretum, and it is a tree that's easy to grow and really beautiful.
This is another one you got Ariadne on, where he tried to get a little too poetic. So he's like, the name means a soft blowing breeze. And Talon was like, no, I know him. His name's Pung Kil. Like, I met the guy. So it looks like it looks like a tree that you would name for a soft blowing breeze with that elegant linear lobulum. I mean, linear lobulums really have that essence of bamboo gardening in Japanese maples. They like combine the two things. So you get everything you love about that elegant Japanese style look of like bamboo gardening of, a lot of Asian gardens feature bamboo, but you get everything you love about Japanese maples because it's non-invasive. It's got fall colors. It's got spring colors. This is a red plant. So, I mean, it's got everything you want, but criminally underrated here. I mean, this one's one, I think it combines so many different great aspects of gardening into one thing. But yeah, you could see how this one would be a soft blowing breeze.
But that's why Google could just lead you wrong, because you can be like, hey, Google, what does Pung Kil mean from Korean translated to English? And it's like soft blowing wind. You're like, awesome.
Well, it's a good thing JD Veritrees didn't have Google, because he's got half his translations wrong. But I mean, it was like the 80s.
He did. Kamagata was his own introduction. It doesn't translate to what he says it did. But Pung Kil, it's named after the guy at Chilipo Arboretum, and it just has this unique effect in the landscape. The dark colors give good color contrast. Don't plant something like Pung Kil in that deep shaded area, because it will darken up those areas. Plant it somewhere with a little more sunlight. You'll really get to see and appreciate the dark color. And if you pair it with something like a summer gold, y'all, it'll really show off.
Come on, guys and gals, give Pung Kil a second chance. Give it a look. You'll like it.
All right, coming at number 15, we got Pink Princess.
Now, this one sells out right away, so it's kind of ridiculous to have it on an underappreciated list, but I had to put it on here because dang if it didn't like the unicorn of maples. Like, this is two different mutations in one, and therefore it is super underrated because of what it is. This is a dwarf mutation as a broom, but also a variegated mutation because it has that Beni Shishihinga coloration to it. More stable than Beni Shishihinga, 5x5 ball, gets out there quickly, but then slows down and tightens up. Pink Princess, it can't help but not be underrated.
I know some people came to open house and picked it up, and then it somehow got into some other nurseries, and they were saying this is a vigorous form of Beni Shishihinga. No, it is a vigorous at a young age, but then it tightens up and denses up. Think of it almost like a shape, something like Seiho, but with Beni Shishihinga leaves. So you've got this vigorous dwarf out there that stays compact and round. There's nothing else like it. I don't know if there ever will be anything else like it. It's a unicorn among Japanese maples, and it's heavily underrated.
Yeah, this tree was actually found by Carl Munn, same guy found Moonrise, Blue Moon, so many other great introductions. Carl found this. He said, I'm not sure this would fit my field-grown operation form. Like, this seems more like a collector plant. You guys, would you like to name it and get it into the industry? So Carl sent us this. I've told the story many times, but it was around the time we were having my first daughter. She's turning 8 right now, so been in the trade a little while. Great plant. So we were thinking Pink Princess. He said that might be too on the nose for Japanese Princess. Talk to Talon Buchholz, make sure that doesn't step on his toes. So we called Talon. Talon said, I love the name Pink Princess. That's great. He's got 2 daughters too, so he understood. Pink Princess, great plant. Anytime you involve royalty or princesses in it too, you're gonna get my kids involved. Like, I got 2 little girls and a little boy, but the girls are always gonna gravitate toward that princess tree. Pink Princess gotta be underrated just because of how unique it is. We were at a plant conference and Barry Inger was trying to think of trees that were both a broom and variegated. And like nobody in the room could come up with them. Of course, we're crazy.
There's some conifers and ginkgos.
So I told them I have this unreleased witch's broom on Bene Shishihenga that's a variegated pink and green, but then also a broom. So that one kind of broke the mold. Peve Maribo I thought of. And we also thought of Metasequoia, a Northlight, or Sherman's Nordlicht, as it's sometimes referred to, as a variegated but also broom characteristic. But it's very rare for a plant to be both things, especially outside of conifers. There's a few conifers you can think of, but in the deciduous world, my goodness, very few examples.
Yeah, and it is one of those just next level trees. Really unusual and different, makes a great container plant. And I think there should be hype among Pink Princess like there is for something like Mayday. I mean, it is one of those trees that is really special, stands out from all the other selections. Definitely something I think people need to be jumping on quicker.
There's a lot of other trees that are coming out, some even patented, where people are pretending it has the shape of Pink Princess. This one actually has that globular, compact, dense shape and is variegated, which you rarely see from seed. It kind of has to be a broom to kind of lock that kind of level trait in. Pink Princess got to be underrated.
Guys, coming number 14 on our most underrated Japanese maples, we've got Acer palmatum Tiger Rose.
Yeah, no, this was one of those first ones, after Mikazuki, which is also criminally underrated, that Talon didn't put the Ghost series name on. I think had this one been Tiger Ghost, man, it wouldn't be underrated anymore. Tiger Rose kind of gets lost a little bit in all of Talon's amazing Ghost series introductions, his reticulated forms. It's kind of pre-New Ghost, but post-Ghost also. So it kind of gets in that gray area. Awesome plant. I mean, the original one's right up next to his window at his first house where he could really enjoy it. So underrated. I love this plant. Really unique foliage, really unique reticulation to it. He said the original one kind of had some rosy color to it as it was flushing out. It's where I got that rose from. But Tiger Rose, I mean, a plant that I think should be bigger in the nursery industry than it is.
I know years ago, Matt and I went to a local garden center and found one for Dad for Christmas. Planted it out, so we've got one at Maplewood Gardens, and it has really beautiful red blooms in the early spring, which sort of adds to that rose effect because for us it is a prolific bloomer, and it shows up really well with those reticulated leaves.
Those Samaras can often be like a pink red as well, so you kind of have that blooming. The seeds almost look like flowers.
The leaves are really elongated as well. It has a really nice, more upright habit, but then the branches sort of semi-cascade along the sides. Makes a beautiful tree out there in the landscape and garden. Again, I think this one is just heavily underrated.
Looks great in a 1 and a 3. I don't see why it doesn't produce more. When we got to get going more. Talon Buchholz's introduction that more people should have for sure.
All right, coming in at number 13, we've got the Chickenfoot Japanese maple. We've got Zhijiao.
Underrated, and it's named Chickenfoot. Come on. So this one has a Chinese name. It was actually named for a guy that supposedly didn't wear shoes, so he had really rough feet. That's where he got the name Chickenfoot.
I think that's the whole reason, the story right there.
That's weird.
Why it's kind of weird. And I think that's the reason why it's so underrated, because it's a beautiful, awesome tree in the garden.
Yeah, you get some orange bark going on this one. You actually get some yellowish orange hues to it, especially in the winter months. Some kind of pinkish orange new growth when it's first leafing out in the spring. It's very vigorous. These are going to work zone 6 through 9, so not down to zone 5 like many of the others. But it doesn't get quite the love some of the other coral bark interest trees get. I think the name could be a little confusing to people too.
I think if we just told people Zhijiao is Chinese for like winter beauty, they'd be like, oh,
winter beauty.
Winter beauty. That sounds way better than Chickenfoot.
It sounds way better than some guy with dirty chicken feet.
Like feet are probably the most awkward like thing in the world. And then also you call it chicken feet. You're like, oh man, you
think
just picture
about this
that.
old man's dirty chicken feet whenever you're buying this tree. It's marketing genius.
I think that is probably why this is probably one of the most underrated trees. I mean, it has just some nice sort of like spring kind of blushing a little bit. You get on the bark itself some orange towards the base, some yellow towards the tipping. It is a very awesome tree. Probably could have had a better name.
Some people are into feet. Maybe they like the chicken feet. We're going to trademark.
This podcast is taking down a whole different level.
We're going to trademark hairy hobbit feet for one of our next. Maybe that'll be a big hit. Hairy, disgusting hobbit feet.
This podcast is going down the wrong way right now already.
It is underrated though. It's a great plant. Great fall color. Sometimes some reddish yellow in the fall color as well. And vigorous. I mean, I find Zhijiao to put on over a foot of growth a year. and really, really look amazing in that winter garden. I mean, if you put this next to, something like Sir Damon or even a Bihu, you're really going to be impressed with the color contrast for that winter bark.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful tree out there in the garden. Probably not the best translation.
The tree doesn't actually look like feet at all. So sorry to disappoint you feet people. It doesn't look like feet at all.
Oh my goodness. All right, coming in next. At number 12, we've got Acer palmatum Nebula.
This one, it came out with a huge spark. Like Nebula out the gate was just an absolute hitter. Everybody was kind of super impressed with this one. I'd say the hype train has slowed down on it a little bit, but it's criminally underrated. This one is so next level for the colors. So we were at the Science Center, we were speaking, and there was this gentleman there actually outside the Science Center, and he was looking at a nebula through a telescope. And I saw how next level the name was that Talon came up with, because Nebula has like the purpler border with like the wider eye to it. And the Nebula had like the darker colors on the outside with the lighter colored eye to it. It actually looks more like the Milky Way Nebula. It's a little bit more purple from what I understand. Absolutely incredible naming. I think that the colors too on this one are so next level.
It's one of those trees that has a strong upright habit. In the springtime, you can get some pink colors to almost peach colors in the leaf itself. But the lime green reticulated veins in the early spring just make this tree just stand out so much more. You get some cream colors as well on this. It constantly changes throughout the seasons. It's one of those trees like Firefly where always the tree is looking different in each and every season. And it has a good bright red fall color as well. Heavily underrated. One of my favorite of the new ghosts. I think, again, there were a lot of those new ghost types that came out around that time. Nebula, it is, to me, it's just an amazing tree, and it doesn't get enough love.
Yeah, this one is next level. I like the naming. I like everything about Nebula. It's really super next level. And kind of gotten underrated a little bit. Again, I think it was so quick out the gate that now the hype slowed down on it. But it's still popular for us. I mean, we're calling it underrated. We still sell a ton of them. But I think it should be more popular than it is.
All right, coming in at number 11, we've got Acer palmatum. This is our only Makawa type on this listing, Catalina Yatsubusa.
Here's the goofy part about that. We probably sell this one second most after Makawa Yatsubusa too. We got it on here underrated, but it's because we've had so many of them. We've offered so many of them that I think people probably undervalue this one. I mean, it goes on sale. You'll see this one at open house pretty frequently, still around at the end of the day. It's a variegated Makawa form that I think just simply because of our exposure and how much we've offered it, people see us sell this one and they're like, wow, Catalina must not be as cool as X, Y, and Z. Well, it's like, yeah, we had 200 of them. So that set on 10 at 10, we might only had 50 of something else. So the numbers will deceive you a little bit and have probably led to this one being a little bit underrated for how cool it is.
I agree. I mean, we've probably sold maybe 1,000 to 2,000 of these in the last year and a half. And we've got it out there and it's became really popular with people who have it. But, when something sells out like Mayday in a matter of minutes on MrMaple.com, the hype train goes off the charts for it. People really want that tree. And maybe because more people were able to get Catalina Yatsubusa, that is the reason why it is heavily underrated, because it's still a variegated Makawa Yatsubusa that has that sort of Dr. Seuss-esque vibes on a tightly layering Makawa Yatsubusa form.
Yeah, I've seen people literally say that, in the chat, like during a 10 at 10, it's like, well, it doesn't sell out as quickly as Red Panda or Kryptonite or Mayday. And it's like, well, guys, there's way more of them. There's a reason why. And they'll literally kind of rate it lower. Like, oh, that one's not quite as good because they have it in stock. Well, like, yeah, we've got a ton of them. That's why. Underrated, amazing plant. Love it. Interesting spring color, great fall color. You got to have it if you're a Makawa collector. A little bit more upright than something like Lily Pad. Just a showy plant all around. And Catalina Yatsubusa probably could use some more love than it gets.
Coming at number 10, we've got Acer palmatum. It's a lace leaf, Seiryu Mory.
Now, it's hard to say this one's underrated. JD Vertree says this is his favorite fall color lace leaf, I think. Or at least his favorite fall color green. I'd have to look at his disclaimers, but he's really big on this one. I love its arching out habit, and it is phenomenally yellow in the fall. Like, it is one of the better true yellow golden colors in the fall.
I'd say it's probably the most underrated green lace leaf. our Waterfall, Varieties, Emerald Lace, they always get more love than Seiryu Mory.
I think a lot of people can say Waterfall.
And Seiryu Mory has this beautiful arching habit. It stands out from many of the other lace leaf selections. And when you see a specimen in the landscape and you just see how it just arches outwards and has this really wide shape to it, there's nothing else quite like it. It's really beautiful and it's heavily underrated.
Yeah, beautiful plant, great structure. Tends to be much wider than it is tall. A little bit shorter than Waterfall in the same time frame. So typically 4 foot, maybe 6 foot wide, where Waterfall can be more of like a 5x5 in the same kind of time frame. More of a dome-shaped umbrella as well. I mean, it's not uncommon for Seiryu Mory to put on way more width and height. Not necessarily as wide or fast-growing as Emerald Lace, but more in the shape of Emerald Lace than in Waterfall.
And there's a beautiful specimen of these at Seiryu Gardens. If you get a chance and you're near Durham, North Carolina, you can stop by and see that specimen. You can sort of see what we're talking about, just this really beautiful arching shape. It's an amazing weeping green lace leaf. Everybody needs to have. It's heavily underrated. Super
heat tolerant as well. All right, guys, coming in here at number 9. This one is criminally underrated. I could put it higher up on my list for sure. Green Star. I'm trying to bring it back. I love that one at Ed Shin's, NJ Acer's. A lot of my impressions of trees come from his place. This is a Dick Wolf introduction that, honestly, it's better than Ichigyoji. Everybody says Ichigyoji for the yellow fall color. Sounds like something you might need some powder for. It's like Sculler Pendulum. That sounds a little even worse sometimes. That one could be on our list, too, for underrated name. But Green Star does what you want Ichigyoji to do. Like, you'll see a Varieties list Ichigyoji, Hogyoku, and Osakazuki as like the trifecta because they'll look similar, but then have different fall colors. I never get that boldy yellow on Ichigyoji here, but I do on Green Star. So I think Green Star makes a better trifecta for me with Hogyoku and Osakazuki. Those three together, you get the red from Osakazuki, the orange from Hogyoku. I think Green Star, one of the best yellows. It can rival Ginkgos many times. I have one beside my mother-in-law's home. It stops traffic. I mean, she put that out in a 3-gallon when me and Amy started dating, maybe in like 2013. It is a beautiful tree now. And I mean, it really stops traffic. Like people see that one in the fall. It has all the appeal in the yellow of a ginkgo tree in a much smaller stature and a nice, compact, dense Japanese maple.
When it has that upright structure and it's got in the early spring with those sort of like green hands as it's opening, that's one of my favorite times of the year with Green Star. It really gives that sort of almost Sumagaki-like effect, but on a pure, just light green leaf. Really lively feel out there in the garden. Again, criminally underrated. Makes a beautiful tree in the garden. Often in traditional Japanese gardening, where you're often seeing people deal with, you know, these green Japanese maples that have good fall color. And Green Star has more fall color like we saw at many temples in Japan, where you see mostly yellows. Late, you may get some hints of orange across it. That's what Green Star does. And that is what most people should be looking for if they're trying to recreate some of those temple gardens in Kyoto.
Might be a good one for Momiji Tempura with that yellow fall color. Never really think about it for that.
Ooh.
Good plant, though, and super underrated. I would say greens in general don't get enough love in America. So a lot of the green uprights, they kind of get forgotten. People kind of push them to the side. They don't really always get the love that a lot of the reds. A lot of people's first Japanese maple was a red. And as Tim was mentioning, especially in Japan, I mean, greens kind of dominate. Like the greens, especially this style, they get a lot of love because great fall color changes. It's not going to look like the straight species either. The leaf's a lot bigger. Typically, what we use for rootstock goes to more of an orange-red. These are going to be distinctly bold yellow. Really refined. I love Green Star. I think it's an absolute winner. And I think it belongs in the trifecta with Osakazuki and Hogyoku.
Coming in at number 8 on our most underrated Japanese maples, we've got Acer palmatum, Horizontalis.
Horizontalis. Yeah, that's a mouthful. You talk about Latin names that sound terrible. Horizontalis doesn't exactly give this one the greatest start. I think that probably has to do with why it's criminally underrated. This one is as wide growing as a Ryusen, Jiro Shidare form as you'll ever see. It reminds me a little bit more of Jiro Shidare. Big leaf, fast grower. But Horizontalis describes exactly what this one wants to do. I mean, it wants to, if you don't stake this one, it's going to be short and wide. It's going to be, you know, a pancake of a tree if you just let it go. I actually like to not stake this one, just let it do its thing in the landscape. It's going to put on, 6-7 foot of width, but only 2 to 3 feet of height unless you're staking it up.
Yeah, it definitely has the widest to the shortest ratio of any of those styles. It still has that arching habit. It doesn't just crawl across the ground, but it has this really wide arching habit, growing much wider and shorter than something like Jiro Shidare.
Yeah, a lot of people will use Ryusens. Well, not a lot of people, but I've seen it done in really cool gardens like Michael Steinhardt's garden, where they were using Ryusen almost as a ground cover. Horizontalis is going to beat that because it's going to fill out way quicker. It's going to put on way more width, and it's going to stay short. So your vigor is going to be a little bit faster on something like this for a smaller, shorter plant. Really cool one from Australia. Doesn't get the love it deserves. I think we put it out. I mean, it's a unique new form. You don't see out there as much of a Ryusei style. Next level, heat tolerant, full sun, is up to zone 8. Work zones 5 through 9, but very heat tolerant for Horizontalis, especially coming from Australia.
Yeah, I don't think the name does it much help because it has one of those Latin type names, and it was probably given that Latin name after it was already agreed upon that maples were not going to have Latin names. But its low spreading habit, it does have that horizontal type growth, but still hooks down and has that cascading umbrella effect. There's not many other trees quite like it, and it is one of those trees that I think more people need to be growing.
Pancake. Pancake's a conifer term people love. You thought of this one as pancake, people would love it.
Oh, they definitely would.
All right, guys, coming in here at number 7, we got Green Twinkie.
Green Twinkle.
Acer palmatum Green Twinkle, another Talon Buchholz introduction, guys. Underrated. This is a good plant. Fast growing as a dwarf, but it doesn't get too big. I've got one in my landscape, makes more of a dome kind of shape, but it looks really in its growth almost more like a Kiyohime. So remember that kind of shape. That toadstool-like habit's really unique because it's a small leaf Matsumure. So this one would also look cool, maybe even as a bonsai. Reminds me of the growth rate a lot of a witch's broom. So I don't know that it ever was a broom, but it kind of has like a witch's broom Seiryu type characteristic to it. Like it's got that smaller leaf, goes to a nice red in the fall. Just all around beautiful tree. And I think it's got a little extra something, especially with that small, almost lace leaf looking leaf. I
agree. I mean, that Matsumure gives it a soft feel. The shape, something along the lines of like a Hime Sojo or a Seiho, but in a Matsumure. I mean, there's nothing else quite like it. I think originally we thought the name was Green Twinkles. It may have been how the first tag that we had, the tree arrived to us as. But Talon emailed us and said, guys, take off the S, it's Green Twinkle.
I thought it was Green Twinkie.
Definitely not Green Twinkie. I think somebody hasn't had lunch yet. But Green Twinkle is amazing. It is heavily underrated because there's nothing else quite like it. It's a beautiful tree in the garden. It's easy to use, easy container plant. And it's a tree that is just simply underrated.
Looks like none of the other toadstool types. Grab your Green Tinkle today. Coming in here at number 6, we've got MrMaple, another Talon Buchholz introduction from those New Ghost.
Yeah, and being MrMaple, we had to get MrMaple. It sort of plays with our name. It was an introduction by Talon Buchholz.
Never got any royalties on him from that one.
We didn't.
Seems a little on the nose.
But MrMaple, when we were doing a presentation on Talon Buchholz's newest introductions, on the fly, we were given his presentation at the Southern Nurserymen Association's conference. And MrMaple was one of the few trees on that list that we didn't have any experience with, but we'd read about it on his blogs. It was a tree we were chasing after because, one, it ties into our name with MrMaple, but it is a really beautiful tree.
I know my MrMaple back at home, she's MRS now. She had to have one of these right by the door. So there's one of these in our entranceway into our front door. Had to have a MrMaple in the landscape. Awesome plant, yellowish green foliage in the spring. I mean, typically more of a yellowish hue. Great orangey fall color, sometimes even more of a bold red late. Underrated, beautiful plant in that New Ghost series. Looks amazing with many of the other New Ghosts. I mean, MrMaple pairs really well with Nebula we talked about earlier, or something like Celebration. Really a big fan of this one. Again, I've got one right at the doorstep, and as that thing continues to mature, it is just a showstopper there in the landscape, especially in the early spring.
Yeah, the early spring, you can get some weird hues of green off of it with some really nice reticulation. It's almost like blue-green type colors, some strong veining throughout the leaf with that ghost-like variegation. The fall colors, some bright reds as well. Probably one of the better fall colors of those New Ghost types. It has a good upright form as well. MrMaple, super duper, uber underrated.
All right, guys, coming here at number 5, we've got Acer palmatum Livi. Now, Livi's one I got from Carl Munn early on, too. You don't see this one many times. I believe it was coming out of Canada when he originally got this one. This one is super underrated. Now, we did have this one in a Buckholz video of underrated plants while we're walking around. As you see a mature one of these and you see that shape, you really start to understand the possibility of these. Livi kind of does a lot of what people want Pixie to do, too, in that denser habit. I mean, it's very dense, very full, not a big plant. It almost, as it matures out, it almost looks like a truly like red Fire Glow X Makawa Yatsubusa sometimes.
And it has that layering habit as it ages. At a young age, you don't see it as much, but when you see an older tree in the ground or an older specimen in a container, you start to realize how it really looks more like a red Makawa Yatsubusa. I think more seedling selection should be done looking through Livi because you might be able to find some game changers there. But it really, as an older tree, it's next level. And I think it's heavily underrated because, one, a lot of people don't really see those older specimens. And two, you get it at a young age and it's going to be 10 years because this is a newer selection into the trade before this tree actually starts to get rated as high as it should.
Awesome structure, awesome plant. You do want to give it some morning sun to pick up those colors. I've seen them in heavy shade be kind of more of a pale green. If you're giving it a little bit of sunlight, it'll be really exquisitely pink red. So, I mean, just a nice color. One that doesn't get enough love coming in here in our top 5, Livi.
Coming at number 4, we've got Acer palmatum Elegans.
Now, I don't think this one gets enough love in the U.S., but when I was at Western Bird Arboretum with Hugh Angus and Peter Gregory, I mean, there were people setting up just jaw-dropping on the ground, photographing the old, mature Acer palmatum Elegans at Western Bird Arboretum. I mean, there was a lineup of people. I'm sure they had a photo contest, and I guarantee you whoever won that photo contest, it was a picture of Elegans because everybody was there. And you get so many great fall colors in Elegans all at the same time.
And this is a fairly vigorous, upright green Matsumuri, so it makes a beautiful tree in the garden. We've got a gorgeous specimen of this at Maplewood Gardens. When we bought Highland Creek Nursery, he had a huge 3-gallon that was grown in the ground. We cut the pot off of it. We cut the roots off of it, cut the pot off of it, and then planted it in the ground at my parents' home at Maplewood Gardens. And it's turned into a gorgeous tree. And it's only been in the ground for about 10 years now because we bought that nursery in 2014 and it's 2024 now. It is an extremely beautiful tree in the landscape. And when those fall color hits, there's nothing else quite like it.
Yeah, I mean, this one's super underrated. It's one I think more collectors should be wild about. Oranges, reds, yellows infused with purples and almost bluish colors at times. It's weird looking. It's really a kaleidoscope in the fall. Green in the spring with that heavy Matsumuri style leaf. You get some pink flushes over top of that, a new growth, but really green is the main color with some blushes of color. Vigorous, heat tolerant, cool shape. Elegans, it's super underrated. You got to give this one another look. It's a great Japanese maple that I think would fit a lot more collector gardens too. It's going to provide shade for a lot of the other plants. It's fall color. I mean, put this out. It's one of those most dynamic fall color palmatums.
So we've made it from number 20 all the way to number 3 on our most underrated Japanese maples. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, the MrMaple Show, there's often video components with it. You go check us out there. They typically air on Sundays directly after the podcast comes out on Saturday. But let us know what your top 3 most underrated Japanese maples are and see how they compare with the next 3 that we'll be talking about today.
All right, guys, coming in here at number 3, we've got Acer palmatum Hoshi Zora, another Ryusei style.
Yeah, this is that heavily cascading form, one of the newest introductions by Kobayashi Momiji in Japan. Again, that is the nursery that introduced Tamukiyama, and 300 years later has introduced Acer palmatum Ryusen. Hoshi Zora, one of their newest brand new introductions with that strong cascading habit.
Yeah, they've had some rough dealings with nurseries in America. There's been people that haven't been very fair to them in the past. And one of my friends in Japan was like, are you sure you want to go over there without me? I don't know that it would be that well received. And I said, oh, we've already been there. They give us sake and we had Hoshi Zora and we bought prints of trees. And, the universal language a lot of time is just respect. So something that we always give, especially when we're visiting older nurseries. But I got a fond place in my heart for that place, just mostly because Taka Kobayashi was so surprised at how much they like Matt and Tim. I guess we charmed them over when we went in there buying all the art, but really cool people. Hoshi Zora, showstopper in the fall, heavily cascading green with just a vigorous, it's a rival to Ryusen for its vigor on its weeping color and shape. looks great in a container, looks great in the ground. I tend to stake it up to about 5 to 6 feet. Tends to have more orange than the Ryusen has that red.
The name translates as Starry Night, and it's said to have just this vibrant fall color. It has that same similar habit, though, so it's easy to train, easy to shape, really vigorous. And I'm telling you, this selection is heavily underrated. It doesn't get the love that many of the other Ryusen types does, and I don't really know why, because it is extremely beautiful, easy to grow, super heat tolerant. I think more people need to be growing Hoshi Zora.
All right, number 2. This is probably the tree that started the whole list off, because we were thinking about how underrated Oregon Sunset is. Oregon Sunset is so next level. It could have its own category for shape. Like, it could be the Oregon Sunset group, because the shape is so unique. There's nothing really else shaped like it. It looks like, a small, almost like plane tree. Like, you get this width to it. It looks like a bonsai on its own. You get this wide arching, multi-stemmed, wide arching base to it. Next level fall color. I mean, next level fall color. It's a bold red in the spring. Can green up a bit midsummer. But man, is this one just criminally underrated? Everybody's got to have this one in their collection. It's so beautiful.
I love when the specimens are allowed to just sort of get that width that Oregon Sunset naturally has. If you don't do a lot of pruning and you don't try to stake it up, just let it get that width, and then sometimes it'll get the width and then arch upwards. And that just gives it this unique feel in the garden that not many other Japanese maples have.
You can typically pick them out in a garden. A Japanese maple garden, as we're riding by or walking through a garden, it's easy to pick out the Oregon Sunsets just by that shape. I
think NJ Acer edged in. He's got one of the most beautiful specimens I've ever seen. The JC Rouse and Arboretum has some beautiful specimens as well. And its habit is what makes this tree so beautiful and so different. Now, it is a red Japanese maple in the spring. It's got some new growth that's sort of almost like Kamigata-like on the very new growth. And the fall color makes it look like an Oregon Sunset. You get some yellows and oranges and some pink reds in there all at the same time. It is exceptional all throughout the year. Give it some protection from the hot afternoon sun. But I'm telling you, there's nothing that has a shape quite like Oregon Sunset. And when you see a specimen in the garden, it's going to be one of your favorite trees.
I think especially when that fall color is at its peak is when it's more the orange-red color. Like, there's a lot of colors it changes to, so it kind of malts through a whole season. But you can get this at times where it is kind of an orangey red. And I mean, it is just special in the landscape, especially in that extra color. I think the tree almost looks like a bonsai on its own too. So it looks like a big bonsai in the landscape. It looks like somebody's intentionally pruned, kind of flared the plant out. Just makes such a great looking shape. Great in the container, great in the ground. Hard to beat it. And I mean, for this list, criminally underrated Oregon Sunset.
All right, y'all, we're down to number 1 on our most underrated Japanese maples. Any guesses? Any guesses on what number 1 is going to be?
All right, first, before you do, guys, make sure to give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. We put out 7 days a week of free Japanese maple related content on YouTube and on podcasts. So on your favorite podcast platform, we ask, if you want to pay us back for this, you can always shop on MrMaple.com. But a free way to pay us back is giving us a 5-star review that helps other people find our show. Also, sharing it helps a lot. Coming in here at number 1. This is one of my favorite plants. So it underrated is all a spectrum of how underrated is it for how popular it is. We sell out of this plant, but I don't understand how this is in a lot of people's top 5s. Like, I don't understand how this isn't a lot of people's number 1 favorite Japanese maple. And I'm talking about Acer palmatum Rikuzen Shidare. This thing is so underappreciated for what it is. Comes from a temple. You've heard the story. The tree was taken from the temple. Tsunami happens. They told him not to get cuttings. People got cuttings before that. Returned the tree to him after the tsunami and said, this is the importance of sharing. Story aside, I mean, even if it didn't have this crazy tale, this fable about the tree and nurturement.
That's totally true.
Yeah, it's totally true. But it's super underrated just for what the genetics are in this. I believe it to be one of the first Ryusen style trees that doesn't share any genetics with Ryusen. Like, somebody have to test it to prove it. But this one comes more from that heavy Emoenum style leaf. So it looks more like Green Star. It looks more like, Osakazuki and Hogyoku on that larger style foliage. Now, this one can rival Green Star for that yellow as well. Heavily cascading, unique, structurally so different than any of the other Japanese maples out there. I do tend to stake this one up to about 6 to 7 foot. Tends to want to get a little bit bigger than Ryusen too. I mean, a little bit larger of a plant. Often the branches are more stretched out than Ryusen because of that Emoenum style. So that more like the growth rate of something you'd see on Osakazuki. And man, a perfect pairing with Osakazuki as well. So you get that red with this yellow. Absolutely love this plant. I mean, we could sell 1 million of this tree, and I think it would still be underrated for me. I think this should be a lot of people's number one favorite Japanese maple.
It's a game changer. I mean, you have that larger leaf, that weeping habit. You've got a beautiful tree. It's easy for people to grow. It's got a cool, awesome story behind it about, being at this temple, getting washed away. Somebody saved it, then took it back to the temple, even though they weren't supposed to be taking cuttings off it originally. And then saying, this is the importance of sharing. Love that story. That story is next level.
Especially because
it's
a good fable. It has a good moral for nurserymen. Like, share with us.
Yeah. And then on top of that, it's an awesome tree. And, we list, sets of these of 40 or 50 of these on MrMaple, and they last sometimes a month or two. And it's like, how did that stick around? This is one of the coolest trees I've ever seen. It's got one of the coolest stories I've ever heard, and yet it doesn't have the hype behind it that I think it should.
My kids want to be nurserymen when they grow up. That's the kind of stories I tell them before bed. The story of Rikuzen Shidare. Like, Dad, tell us another Rikuzen Shidare story. That's amazing. I love it. Underrated, guys. You don't have to lower expectations at all for this one either. It is premium, but I still think criminally underrated. I mean, Rikuzen Shidare, again, I think it should be on a lot of people's top fives. I think it should be number one for a lot of people. And I think as it gets out there more, it's going to be. I know it's a tree that we plan to heavily increase production on at Buckholz and at MrMaple, get it in more garden centers, get it coming out more at MrMaple, get it all across the United States. Absolutely love this plant.
Thank you all for tuning in today's podcast. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Check us out on YouTube as well, The MrMaple Show. And we really appreciate if you shop with us on MrMaple.com.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.